let's segue out of documentation and talk about what is some of the legal trends in franchising that are most intriguing and maybe disturbing to you right now.
Well, the biggest is joint employment.
Yep.
Now the NLRB is going back to the strict interpretation. I don't know if that's going to, through the courts, if that's going to stick. But now you have to tell your franchisor clients in their ops manual, back in the day when you were doing it, you had a whole HR section. How to fire, hire. You've got to take that out now. The franchisor can't get involved at all in the employment operations of the franchisee. They want to hire somebody, they want to fire somebody. Even if they ask you for your advice, you can't give it.
But the law is essentially trying to be passed is essentially saying that no matter what you do, Mr. Franchisor, you are a joint employer with the franchisee.
That's the interpretation. In California, they've changed it now, but the NLRB is not, and we're going to see how that shakes out. That's part one. The other part that it looks like it's going to carve out is that they're outlawing non-competes for employer-employees, but there's going to be an exemption for franchisor or franchisees. So while a non-compete, if you hire somebody and you put a non-compete, you can't compete. It's not going to be legal. But a franchisee who signs a franchise agreement where there's a non-compete, if they leave the system, that's going to continue to be illegal.
That is going to be a challenge. I kind of wonder this whole joint employer thing. It's obviously not good for franchising. And it's being misinterpreted, this law, as they're not really thinking about the ramifications that it's going to be for franchise owners. Everybody gets hurt by this, franchisors and franchisees. It's
everybody gets hurt.
It's a lose-lose situation. Do you think that potentially it may impact people from franchising their company?
No, I don't think so. Because if the lawyer explains to them what they have to do, the strict interpretation, I'm not sure the courts are going to buy that.
Right.
If the franchisor is a very much hands-off franchisor, I'm not sure that if somebody slips and falls in a restaurant, that the franchisor is going to be responsible. But if the franchisor, and I have clients that think they can stick their nose in the franchising business, and I tell them, no, you can't. If they want to hire somebody and you don't think that you can't say don't hire them. You can't say you can't pay them this and you can't pay them that. You want to stay out of that, totally away from that.
Sure. At the end of the day, we know that anybody, I think you maybe told me this, but anybody could sue anybody for anything. So There's a slip and fall in a restaurant. It's not stopping any customer from suing the franchisor.
No. Now, the franchisor can certainly protect themselves with insurance, and I recommend that. And that's one way to do it. So let the insurance company duke it out and let them be responsible. But not every franchisor, emerging franchisor, can afford that. They're not cheap policies.
Right. What about on this joint employer on the franchisee side? Do you think that some franchisees that are actually rooting for this because they feel like it's giving them additional protection? Yeah. What do you think?
Maybe. You know what? Yes and no, but they also know that this is really sticking your nose into their business, and they don't want to do that either.
I'm very curious on maybe some of the creative ways that franchisors have navigated the regulatory environment to stand out. Is there any? Can you give me any examples maybe?
Here's the problem. As you know, there are 15 states that require registration and 35 don't. Now, if you take the 15, I would say 12 of the 15 has made it very difficult for companies to get registered. New York, for example, can take 4 months for a new company to get registered. And that's ridiculous. Maryland is 2 months. I mean, and unfortunately, we're in a bad position, lawyers, because the clients think it's our fault. We're not the only company that's experiencing that problem.
Right.
It's across the board. And I don't know how to resolve it. It got worse when the pandemic hit because they laid off people, they were shorthanded. So it exacerbated the time, and it hasn't changed.
Well, with that said, what are your thoughts on a new franchisor or even emerging franchisor on their growth strategy? Do you prefer or do you suggest growing regionally or versus nationally? What's your thoughts on the shotgun approach of everywhere versus regional?
I've always said to clients, regional is better than trying the shotgun approach. Look, if you're based in Florida and you sell a franchise in the state of Washington, how are you going to get out there to visit with them? It's going to cost you a fortune. You'll get there eventually. And certainly now there are a few states where I tell clients, don't bother. Don't go to California and don't go to Washington. They're the worst states, okay, regulatory-wise. I mean, there are 35, 36 states you could say you could do pretty well. You could have a nice brand with 35 states involved.
Right. No, that those two states in particular, well, certainly California is making it such a challenge that it's almost like the state is saying, we don't want you, Mr.
That's
Franchisor.
Right. That's exactly what they're saying.
Yeah.
We don't want franchising in our state.
How can a new franchisor make their brand legally more appealing to franchisees? Is there something that a franchisor can do, giving the franchisees more latitude to make it more appealing? And what would that look like?
I'm not sure they want to do that, the franchisors. They still want the franchisees to follow the system.
Right.
I'm not sure that there's much you could do to navigate that and make it more palatable. Franchisees know or should know that they're going into a system where they have to follow the rules. It's not like going into your own business by yourself. You can independently do whatever you want. There's a system. There's a reason why every McDonald's is the same and why every Subway is the same. So there really is not much that a franchisee can do or that a franchisor would want them to do to deviate from the system.
What about some of the legal troubles? What are typical when you see a new franchisor that gets in legal trouble? What is usually the reasons why?
Well, the primary reason is they don't have an itemized team and they tell people how much money they can make, which is illegal. And if the franchisee doesn't make that kind of money, that they're going to turn around and say, you sold it to me fraudulently. Mm-hmm. That's always been, that's why, companies you put in the itemized team and they can't argue with you. That's it. Those are the numbers. If you don't do those numbers, it's not our fault. We have it in item 19. So we didn't tell you we can make more than that. Right. That's what the system is doing. So item 19 really is not only a sales tool, but it's a legal protection for the franchisor.
Sure. And the franchise agreement in itself is not something that you want to ever, as a franchisor, have to open up that file cabinet, right?
No, you want to put it in your drawer. Yeah. The other reason why franchisors wind up suing franchisees is because they don't follow the system. And they do things, if it's a restaurant, they add items to the menu that they're not supposed to, and they do things that they really can't do. So the franchisor has to be an enforcer as well.
So what do you tell clients when they know there's a franchisee that's not following the system and they've talked with them, and like, how far do we keep pushing until we take legal action? Where's that line drawn?
You try to talk to them. Look, if they're not happy, then the best thing to do is ask them, why don't you just sell the business? Right. We'll find your buyer. Their buyer's out there. And if you're not happy, you don't like following a system, then sell your location. It's very easy. We'll help you do that. But if they're not, and they're not following the system, then the franchisor has to bite the bullet and send out a default notice. And if they don't cure the default, you're going to have to bring a lawsuit. One of the things I pride myself on in the 46 years, I haven't had too many franchisors get sued. Mm-hmm. Maybe 3 or 4 in all those years, and then most of them settled. But there are times when you don't have a choice. I'll give you an example. I have a client that the franchisee decided they were going to take the sign down and open up a competing business with a different name, except in California where you can do that, actually. That's another reason why you stay out of California.
Yes.
The franchisor had no choice but to stop them, and they did. Mm-hmm. Because you can't have a franchisee thumb their nose at you and say, you know what, I'm going to do it anyway. I don't care what you sue me. Right. Well, it cost them a lot of money, and they're going to lose.
Sure. And no matter who wins, it's a lose-lose situation.
Legal fees are not cheap, that's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we had an experience many, many years ago where we didn't do anything wrong, and a franchisee sold a new territory that he didn't own to a potential franchisee. And he said, I will buy it, and then you pay me. And of course, the deal went south. We didn't know about any of this. And the potential franchisee sued us, the franchisor, and said we should have controlled them. Obviously, we didn't know that. And of course, it got thrown out. But who loses? everybody. We lost. We cost us a ton of legal fees, and
everybody loses.
Yeah, so you just don't know. There's always a weird situation like that, but that's probably one of the things that I would imagine as a new emerging franchisor to try to prepare for is you don't want to. I'm not saying prepare for a lawsuit, but you really need to be prepared for enough dollars in your war chest, right? For legal.
Sure. Sure, and you know, sometimes franchisors are smart to take, if they're, let's say they're from 6%, take a 0.5% and stick it in a bank, because that'll build up enough that if you need to use it for that, you'll have it. Franchisors got to be careful about overlapping territories and reselling a territory that they shouldn't have resold, because that's gotten some of them into trouble. And I had a broker system do that. They sold a territory and then they sold another franchise to somebody, and it overlapped. And there was a lawsuit, a potential lawsuit, until it got settled. You got to be very careful about it. And when you hire brokers, you got to make sure that when they find a prospect and where they want to go, you better make sure that there's nobody in that territory.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.